Hey guys, today we're tearing apart another piece of pro-natalist propaganda, and I think this one accidentally exposes the biggest weakness in the entire pro-natalist worldview. They spend nearly an hour telling us how wonderful marriage and children are, how much happiness they bring, how much meaning they provide, how they make your life richer, fuller, and less lonely, but they never actually answer the question they're pretending to answer. What is wrong with not having children? They never explain who is harmed when someone chooses not to reproduce. They never justify why anyone should feel morally obligated to create another conscious being. Instead, they simply assume birth is good, assume declining birth rates are bad, then spend the next hour piling benefits onto the parents as if that somehow justifies imposing an entire lifetime of suffering, risk, and death on somebody else. Once you notice that sleight of hand, the entire discussion starts to collapse under its own weight. They spend this entire discussion circling around the alleged tragedy of people not getting married and not having children, yet somehow never manage to explain what is actually wrong with either choice. That is the remarkable thing. They talk for nearly an hour. They produce statistics, anecdotes, fertility projections, happiness surveys, church stories, soccer games, hospital visits, sex frequency comparisons, and misty-eyed fantasies about grandchildren. But the central proposition is never defended. Why is it bad not to have children? Not inconvenient for employers, not disappointing for grandparents, not economically awkward for pension systems. Not contrary to Catholic doctrine. Why is it morally bad for an individual to decline to create another conscious organism? They never answer because they never even ask. The entire conversation begins after the conclusion has already been assumed. Birth is good, therefore fewer births are bad. Marriage is good, therefore fewer marriages are bad. Children generate meaning, therefore people without children are missing the meaning they ought to possess. This is not an argument. It is cultural conditioning repeating itself through a microphone. They open by describing young people withdrawing from dating as a huge problem, then immediately connect that withdrawal to projections that many will never marry or have children. But why is that in itself a problem? A person not entering a romantic relationship is not a public emergency. A person not signing a marriage contract has not injured anyone. A person not creating a child has not deprived an existing child of anything. No neglected infant is sitting in the void wondering why some 27-year-old decided to play video games, travel, maintain friendships, care for animals, make art, sleep peacefully, and keep her reproductive organs out of a national economic strategy. The unborn do not experience exclusion. They do not feel disappointed. They do not stand outside existence with their little spectral noses pressed against the glass, begging to be drafted into cancer, grief, wage labor, and eventual decomposition. No one is harmed by not being created because there is no one there to be harmed. Yet the podcast treats non-creation as though millions of actual people are being abandoned at an airport. The language gives the game away. They say 1 in 3 young adults may never marry, and 1 in 4 may never have children, then describe this as sad and sobering. Why? Because the guest personally enjoys being a husband and father, because he likes taking children to soccer games, traveling with them, watching religious ceremonies, and imagining family members helping one another through hospitals and old age. That may be an honest description of his own preferences, but it is not a demonstration of anyone else's deficiency. I enjoy coffee. Someone else enjoys collecting stamps. Another person derives profound meaning from rebuilding engines, studying insects, composing music, or spending 6 hours arranging fictional furniture in a video game. The fact that an activity gives one person meaning does not transform abstaining from it into a tragedy. Personal fulfillment is not a universal summons. You cannot look at your own preferred life structure, declare yourself satisfied, and then diagnose everyone who chose differently as a failed version of you. And notice the shamelessly parental direction of every supposed benefit. Why should you have children? Because you might be happier. Because you might feel less lonely. Because your life might feel fuller. Because you can take them to soccer. Because you can attend school concerts. Because you can experience first communions. Because they might help you navigate a hospital, because they may support you in old age. because grandchildren might brighten your retirement. Every arrow points toward the existing adult. The child appears as a delivery mechanism for meaning, companionship, identity, social status, entertainment, and elder care. The discussion barely considers the child as an independent moral subject. The child is scenery in the adult's redemption arc. That is not a minor omission. It is the whole moral problem. Suppose I tell you that owning a horse would make me happier. Perhaps it would. Suppose I show you data indicating that horse owners report greater life satisfaction. Suppose I describe the beautiful mornings, the sense of responsibility, the outdoor exercise, and the profound bond between human and animal. None of that would establish that I ought to breed another horse into existence. It might establish that adopting or caring for an existing horse could benefit me and perhaps the horse. Reproduction introduces a different ethical question because it creates the needs that it then claims to satisfy. A non-existent child does not need a parent, a home, an education, medical care, affection, or soccer practice. Creation generates the vulnerable being and all the problems associated with protecting that being. Then pronatalism congratulates itself for attempting to solve the problems it deliberately manufactured. The podcast never establishes that a future child needs to be created. It cannot, because needs belong to existing beings. It instead establishes that existing adults may want children. Those are entirely different statements. I want someone is not equivalent to someone needs me to create them. The first is a desire. The second is fictional moral authority ventriloquized through an imaginary person. Then comes the happiness argument, the workhorse of this entire pronatalist rodeo. Married mothers, we are told, are 2 or 3 times more likely to report being very happy than single childless women in certain comparisons. Let us grant every statistic. Let us pretend there are no selection effects, no socioeconomic differences, no religious confounders, no health differences, no distinctions between voluntary and involuntary childlessness, no survivorship bias, and no tendency for miserable marriages to end and therefore disappear from the married category. Let us hand them the cleanest possible version of the claim, marriage and motherhood make women happier. So what? Happiness is not a breeding license. If creating another person improves my psychological state, that still does not establish that I am justified in exposing that person to every harm contained in life. My increased satisfaction does not erase their future illnesses. My sense of purpose does not cancel their grief. My family photographs do not neutralize their fear of death. My enjoyment of school concerts does not compensate them for every humiliation, injury, panic attack, bereavement, chronic pain episode, betrayal, and terminal diagnosis they may eventually endure. Even if parenthood benefits me, the moral question concerns what I am imposing on them. The podcast cannot distinguish those perspectives because the entire framework is adult-centered from beginning to end. Imagine defending any other imposition with this logic. People who control another person's schedule report more meaning. People who assign someone lifelong obligations feel less lonely. People who manufacture a dependent being experience greater purpose. We would immediately ask whether the dependent person benefits, whether they consented, and whether the risks imposed upon them were justified. But reproduction is protected by such intense cultural sentimentality that basic ethical scrutiny is treated like an obscenity. Apparently, the uterus is a philosophical blind spot. Once babies are involved, cause and effect put on little knitted hats and everyone loses the ability to reason. They also repeatedly claim that single and childless people are more likely to be lonely, unhappy, and lacking in meaning. Again, even if that statistical association is perfectly accurate, it does not prove that childlessness causes these outcomes, nor does it establish that creating children is the appropriate solution. Loneliness is a social problem. It can be addressed through friendship, community, cooperative housing, accessible public spaces, social clubs, mutual aid, chosen family, healthcare, therapy, and a culture that does not discard adults who fail to assemble the approved spouse and 2 children starter kit. Instead of asking why modern life atomizes people, destroys public gathering places, demands exhausting work schedules, prices young adults out of housing and treats friendship as a childish rehearsal for marriage, they leap directly to reproduction. Lonely? Create a dependent stranger? Depressed? Produce a new nervous system? Worried about old age? Manufacture a potential caregiver? This is less an ethical argument than a multi-level marketing scheme run by chromosomes. Children are not medicine for adult loneliness. They are not antidepressants with birth certificates. They are not a substitute for building functioning communities. A child can be lonely. A parent can be lonely. A married person can lie 6 inches away from a spouse and feel as emotionally isolated as someone abandoned on another planet. Relationship status is not human connection by administrative decree. Marriage certificates do not emit intimacy. Giving birth does not guarantee love, companionship, gratitude, or lifelong contact. The podcast romanticizes the ideal family while comparing it to the worst version of single life. Naturally, the ideal wins. An excellent marriage with wanted, healthy, loving children is compared against an isolated, unhappy, socially incompetent, childless adult. What a breathtaking discovery. A thriving social life beats misery. Nobel Committee, clear your schedule. A meaningful comparison would place good marriages beside abusive marriages, desired parenthood beside regretted parenthood, supportive children beside estranged children, healthy families beside households consumed by disability, addiction, violence, or poverty, and happily child-free adults beside fulfilled parents. But that would destroy the commercial. The sales pitch requires family to mean its most photogenic outcome and childlessness to mean a woman alone in a gray apartment eating cereal over the sink while TikTok whispers nihilism into her soul. It is ideological infomercial logic. Here is the shiny product under studio lighting. Here is the alternative filmed in a basement after somebody removed the batteries from the smoke detector. The old age argument is even more grotesque once you remove the soft lighting. The guest speaks about older people benefiting from spouses and children helping them navigate hospitals and later life. That can certainly happen. Families often provide care. But using that possibility as an argument for reproduction means creating someone partly because they may eventually perform unpaid physical and emotional labor for you. It converts the child into a retirement instrument. You invest diapers, school fees, and birthday cakes, then hope to collect elder care 40 years later. Apparently, human creation is a long-term bond with unpredictable returns and a sentimental advertising campaign. No one can guarantee that a child will remain nearby, maintain contact, possess the resources to provide care, or even outlive the parent. Children move away. Children become ill. Children become disabled. Children die. Children become overwhelmed by their own employment and families. Children become estranged, sometimes because their parents treated them like obligated extensions rather than autonomous people. A society concerned about elder care should build humane elder care systems. It should not guilt young adults into producing future nursing staff. Who will look after you is not a moral defense of procreation. It is an admission that the social system is broken and hopes to fill the gaps with daughters. Then they invoke meaning as though meaning settles the matter. Parenting, they claim, creates a life of service, virtue, and fulfillment. It might. But meaningful does not mean morally justified. Soldiers can find meaning in war. Religious fanatics can find meaning in martyrdom. Political extremists can find meaning in sacrificing themselves to a cause. Abusive parents can find meaning in controlling their children. Meaning is an experience generated by a brain. It is not a certificate of ethical purity. The relevant question is not whether an action gives the actor meaning. The relevant question is whether pursuing that meaning wrongfully burdens another sentient being. Parenthood is full of meaning because it is full of needs, emergencies, attachment, and responsibility. But those needs only exist because the parent created the needy person. Lighting a building on fire would also give the firefighters a very meaningful afternoon. We would not praise the arsonist for producing opportunities for courage, sacrifice, and service. Yet reproduction creates vulnerability, danger, disease exposure, mortality, and dependency, after which the parent is celebrated for responding to those conditions with care. Certainly, care is better than neglect once the child exists, but creating a preventable need and then meeting it does not prove the need was beneficial to create. They also glorify suffering. The best things in life, they tell us, involve stress and sacrifice. Elite athletes suffer. Careers require sacrifice. Marriage and parenting are difficult but worthwhile. This is rhetorically effective because it frames reluctance to reproduce as cowardice, laziness, or shallow hedonism. You do not want children because you fear sacrifice. You value autonomy because you are selfish. You avoid parenthood because TikTok taught you to worship brunch. But there is a decisive difference between choosing suffering for yourself and imposing the entire mortal condition on someone else. An athlete consents to training. A student consents to study. A spouse consents to a marriage, at least in any remotely ethical version of the institution. The child consents to nothing. The parents choose the project, but the created person receives the body, the vulnerabilities, the pain receptors, the survival drive, and the death sentence. Praising voluntary sacrifice does not justify involuntary exposure. If I choose to climb a mountain, I accept the risk. If I strap an unconscious stranger to my back and carry them up the mountain because the journey gives my life meaning, my passion stops being morally charming. The podcast speaks constantly about what young people are missing: romance, marriage, sex, children, soccer games, family travel, grandchildren, and someone in their corner. But missing an experience is only bad for someone who exists and desires it. A non-existent person does not miss childhood. They do not miss birthdays, sunlight, music, or love. They also do not miss cancer, war, rape, dementia, loneliness, accidents, poverty, bereavement, or death. Non-existence does not deprive a person because there is no person to experience deprivation. This elementary fact quietly obliterates the emotional imagery. No ghost child is harmed when someone chooses sterilization. No spectral family sits around a non-existent dinner table mourning the career woman who refused to manifest them. The actual adults involved can, of course, regret not having children. Some people want families and fail to create them. That is genuine suffering and deserves compassion. But regret from an existing adult does not establish a general duty to reproduce. People regret careers, relationships, surgeries, missed travel, and countless other irreversible choices. The possibility of regret supports honest information and personal deliberation, not cultural coercion. You do not prevent regret by shoving everyone through the same door. You merely exchange one category of regret for another, except parental regret involves children who can sense that they were unwanted. A child-free person may privately mourn a road not taken. A reluctant parent can make an actual child live inside that regret. That is why pushing people toward family formation is not harmless encouragement. Social pressure predictably creates marriages entered from fear, pregnancies pursued from obligation, and children born to adults who were never enthusiastic about raising them. The podcast treats marriage and parenthood like vegetables. Maybe people resist, but society should encourage them because it knows what is healthy. Except an unwanted salad does not develop consciousness and spend 18 years absorbing resentment. An ill-suited career can be changed. A bad relationship can end. Parenthood cannot be undone without leaving a human being at the center of the wreckage. Anyone who needs persuasion to create a child is precisely the person society should leave alone. Yet pronatalist rhetoric lowers the threshold by making reproduction seem like ordinary adulthood, a standard milestone and a treatment for existential dissatisfaction. Unsure what your life is for? Create a person and assign yourself a mission. The biological pyramid scheme continues because every confused generation produces another generation to provide the confusion with purpose. Their argument for marriage is somewhat more defensible because marriage concerns consenting existing adults. A healthy partnership can create companionship, practical cooperation, intimacy, and mutual support. But even here, the podcast confuses can be beneficial with should be socially prioritized. Marriage is not automatically loving. It is not automatically permanent, ethical, or psychologically healthy, nor does it require children. Two adults may marry and remain child-free. Two adults may build a committed life without state or church recognition. A person may have several profound relationships across a lifetime rather than one permanent marriage. The benefits arise from trust, generosity, compatibility, and commitment, not from the magic syllables on a certificate. The hosts blur marriage and reproduction because their worldview needs them to operate as one package. Date properly, marry young, reproduce, attend church, stay together, generate more believers, and call the resulting structure human flourishing. But these are separate choices with separate ethical considerations. One can defend companionship without defending procreation. One can value commitment without believing a uterus owes civilization replacement workers. One can love deeply without manufacturing descendants. The collapse of these distinctions is not accidental. If marriage is allowed to stand on its own, then the alleged necessity of children becomes much harder to sell. Eventually, the podcast shifts from individual happiness to social continuity. Fertility decline is described as colossal and alarming. Women are warned about biological clocks. Adults are told that prioritizing education and work may leave them childless and later unhappy. Parents are even encouraged to care about whether their own children will marry and reproduce, because otherwise they may reach old age without grandchildren. This is pressure cascading down generations. Have children so your parents can become grandparents, then raise those children to provide grandchildren to you. The species has converted existence into a chain letter. But society is not entitled to births. Economies are human tools, not deities requiring sacrifices. If a pension system requires endless population growth, redesign the pension system. If elder care requires more workers, improve wages, automation, immigration policy, and care infrastructure. If communities are collapsing, rebuild communities. If young adults cannot afford homes, stop treating housing as a speculative casino. Do not solve institutional failures by conscripting non-existent people into future labor markets. A child does not owe the economy a taxable lifespan merely because politicians designed every system on the assumption of infinite demographic expansion. And even if declining population created severe problems, that still would not automatically impose an individual duty to reproduce. Society benefits from many activities that we do not forcibly or morally demand from everyone. Organ donation saves lives. Dangerous infrastructure work sustains cities. Military service may protect states. Caring for severely disabled strangers supports human dignity. Yet we generally recognize limits on demanding bodily sacrifice. Reproduction commandeers a person's body, time, finances, health, and future, particularly the body of the person carrying the pregnancy. To treat this as a civic responsibility is to reduce individuals to demographic equipment. The absence of a real argument is finally exposed by the podcast's emotional vocabulary. Childlessness is sad. Fertility decline is sobering. Families are beautiful. Children provide joy. Marriage is virtue. Career focus is selfishness. Autonomy is shallow. Religion is sacred. These words decorate assumptions. They do not justify them. Calling reproduction beautiful does not address consent. Calling family meaningful does not establish obligation. Calling decline tragic does not identify a victim. Calling marriage virtuous does not explain why an unmarried person has done anything wrong. Ask the simple question and watch the whole structure shake. Who is harmed when a person freely chooses not to create a child? Not the child. There is no child. Perhaps disappointed parents are denied grandchildren, but no one is entitled to descendants from another person's body. Perhaps businesses lose future workers, but corporations are not entitled to newborn employees. Perhaps churches lose future members, but religions are not entitled to inherited congregations. Perhaps governments face demographic adjustments, but states are not entitled to citizens manufactured on command. Perhaps the individual later regrets the choice, but adults are permitted to take personal risks and make irreversible decisions. So where is the wrongdoing? There isn't one. Not having children is one of the rare choices that guarantees no child is neglected, abused, traumatized, diseased, exploited, or killed. It does not solve the suffering of existing beings, but it creates no new victim who must solve the problem of being alive. It leaves no abandoned person behind. It violates no consent because there is no one whose consent can be violated by remaining non-existent. Whatever else one believes about antinatalism, childlessness is not an injury. The podcast never proves otherwise. It simply piles up benefits for parents and calls the pile an argument for birth. Happiness, meaning, companionship, sex, family rituals, elder care, grandchildren, faith, purpose, and virtue. Every benefit belongs to someone already here. Every cost is assigned to someone who cannot evaluate the contract before being permanently enrolled. That is the hidden structure beneath the soft language of family values. Existing people want something, so another person is created to supply it. Perhaps many people will freely choose marriage and children and sincerely love that life. That is their decision. But nobody should be pushed toward creating a family because a sociologist discovered that ideal families photograph better than isolation. Nobody owes their parents grandchildren. Nobody owes the state workers. Nobody owes a church believers. Nobody owes the species continuation. And no hypothetical child is waiting to be rescued from non-existence. Until pronatalists can explain why not creating a person harms that person, they have not made an argument against childlessness. They have merely advertised parenthood to adults. They have described what breeders might receive while refusing to discuss what the created must endure. They have mistaken desire for duty, correlation for commandment, tradition for morality, and personal fulfillment for ethical justification. The tragedy is not that some people refuse to breed. The tragedy is that society has spent thousands of years convincing people that creating a vulnerable, mortal consciousness requires less justification than declining to create one.